This presentation is on elasticities, all of them: price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, and price elasticity of supply. It is primarily designed as a revision video, i.e. you would need to have learnt it first, and this is just a quick reminder. So why is elasticity so useful? Well, first of all, as a concept, it's relatively straightforward to grasp. It comes from everyday life. Say, for example, you like to go to clubs and you're in bed at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning and your best friend comes round and says, should we go out to a club? You're going to turn around and you're going to say, no, go away. I'm in bed. I want to sleep. So you're going to be unresponsive or inelastic. Same friend comes round at 8 o'clock that evening, asks you the same thing. You're going to be out clubbing in no time at all. You're going to be very elastic in your response. You're going to be responsive to that same request. Now, another big plus of it is once you've learned one formula, you've effectively learned them all. You only need to learn one, provided you remember to change the words. It's percentage change in quantity of something divided by a percentage change in something else. Thirdly, it's easy to draw in a diagram, which obviously picks up marks. Take that diagram on the top left. Provided that you remember to change the axes and the labelling on the line, that could represent elasticity of supply, income elasticity of demand for a normal good, cross elasticity of demand for a substitute, and in every single case that diagram shows an inelastic or unresponsive response. Similarly, the diagram on the top right, that could represent elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand for an inferior good, cross elasticity of demand for a complement, and again in every single case there, this is an elastic response because it's a relatively flat line. It's really powerful as a way of getting marks in exams. Once you've got a definition or a formula, you're going to pick up the knowledge marks. Once you've done a calculation, you've picked up the application marks. Similarly, if you look at the factors affecting something, that could also pick up application marks in a particular context. Very useful for analysis because it can explain the extent to which something changes as a result of, say, a change in price or a change in income. And you can use it to evaluate, say, the effects of a price change, the extent to which the quantity is going to be affected. Now, we tend to use it mainly for micro, but if you look at that Keynesian long-run aggregate supply curve at the bottom, you can use it there as well. Now, that flat part on the LRAS curve at the bottom, well, that tends to happen in a recession. So what does the government try to do in a recession? It tries to pump money into the economy. So we recently had, this was recorded during the coronavirus situation, we had an eat out to help out scheme. So the government was giving people money so they'd go out and spend it. Now, they believed rightly that we were in recession, so we're on that flat part of the LRAS curve. So if the government spends more, then you're going to get an impact on GDP, you're going to get an impact on jobs, but there's not going to be a change in price. Now, had the economy been at full employment at the vertical part of the LRAS curve, if the government pumps more money in to boost demand, it's not going to add to jobs at all, it's just going to add to inflation. So really powerful concept is elasticity. So what are the problems people find? Well, one of the big things is writing about the right elasticity. An awful lot of students, say if you give them a question on income elasticity of demand or elasticity of supply, the first words they'll write is price elasticity of demand is a responsiveness of demand to a change in price. But the question is not about price elasticity of demand. Now, an even bigger problem is remembering the factors that affect it. Elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply, totally different concepts. And around about 90%, I'd say, of students, if you give them an elasticity of supply question, write about customers, they write about the factors affecting elasticity of demand, could write a page and get virtually no marks for it. You might just get a mark if you get the definition right. And it's because of that that examiners love asking elasticity of supply questions. They know that everyone's going to get big marks on things like positive and normative economics and some of the easy stuff. And they also know that this is a big distinguisher, so this gives them the opportunity to change grades to affect the grades of students. So they love to put in elasticity of supply questions because they know that a large number of students will write about elasticity of demand, and so you've got a big marked difference there. The final problem, you've got to remember to get the formula the right way up. It's easy to learn, but you've got to learn it. It's percentage change in quantity something divided by percentage change in something else. It's quantity over the thing that's affecting that quantity, not the other way up. So let's do a quick tour of the elasticities. Let's start with the one that everyone starts with, price elasticity of demand. The responsiveness of demand to a change in price, percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. The sign is nearly always negative. It's always negative in a question because as price goes up, we buy less of something. If we ignore the sign, if we're looking at a figure greater than 1, it's an elastic response. If it's infinity, it's perfectly elastic. If it's less than 1, it's inelastic. If it's 0, it's perfectly inelastic. And occasionally you'll get questions where it's 1, it's unity. So under what circumstances will it be elastic? Well, if there's loads of competitors trying to get your money, then that gives you choice. So that makes demand elastic. If it's relatively cheap compared with your income, then you're not going to be that bothered if, say, there's a percentage change in price. You know, a 20% change in the price of a Mars bar is going to have a much lower impact than if there's a 20% change in the price of a house or a car. If it's a luxury, it's likely to be more elastic because it's something that you can afford to give up. If it's non-addictive or habit forming, then again that would make it elastic. It's inelastic if it's something like cigarette smoking, which cigarettes are addictive. If you haven't got brand loyalty for something, then it's likely to be elastic. If, say, you always buy a particular brand of trainer, then that makes it inelastic because it really doesn't matter what the price is, you're still more likely to buy that. If it's easy for consumers to switch, then that makes it elastic. So, for example, gas and non-gas fired power systems in your home, they are going to be inelastic because it doesn't matter what happens to the price, you're going to find it really difficult to shift from a gas-fired system to an electric-fired system. And finally, the more time there is available, the greater the elasticity because you've got more time to make that particular choice. Income elasticity of demand formula, percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in income. Now the sign for income elasticity is important. If you get a minus answer, then you're looking at an inferior good, one where when your income goes up, you buy less of it. So for example, in a few years' time, you're likely to have cars, so your demand for bus travel could well fall. If you get a plus sign, however, it's a normal good. For most goods, if your income goes up, you're going to buy more of it. If your answer is positive and less than 1, it's a normal good. If it's more than 1, it's also a normal good, but it's actually a superior good. So buying cars, again, would be an example of a superior good. When the economy went into the previous recession, demand for cars fell by about 20%. Even though GDP had only fallen by about 6%. So income elasticity of demand was around about 3, more than 3. So it tends to be elastic if it's a luxury. Again, one thing you can do there is you can get a bit of evaluation marks by distinguishing between the extent of the luxury. Food, for example, is a normal good. If you double your income, you're unlikely to double the amount of food that you buy. However, certain types of food, steaks, could well be a luxury good. They could well be normal and superior. Mincemeat will tend to just be a normal good, where the elasticity of demand is positive, income elasticity of demand is positive, but less than 1. Cross elasticity of demand formula, the percentage change in quantity demanded of good X divided by the percentage change in price of good Y. Now, there's 3 possible outcomes you can get from that, from the sign. If the goods are substitutes, then an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in demand for the other. So the sign is positive. So for example, if the price of beef goes up, people are likely to buy more lamb. If you get a minus answer, then those goods are complements. So if the price of one goes up, the demand for the other one goes down. So if, say, there's an increase in the price of printers, then people are likely to buy fewer printers, so they're going to buy less printer ink. So an increase in the price of printers causes a decrease in demand for printer ink. If the answer is close to zero, then the goods are independent. So, for example, if there's an increase in the price of printers, it's unlikely to affect the demand for cars. If we want to interpret the numbers, broadly speaking, the higher the number, the closer the extent of the substitute or the complement. Finally, price elasticity of supply, really vital not to get it confused in any way, shape or form with price elasticity of demand, apart from the fact that the formula is virtually identical and the numbers mean pretty much the same as elasticity of demand numbers, except the sign is positive because suppliers love high prices, whereas consumers don't. Now, the one factor that is identical to elasticity of demand is time. If you waffle on about time on an elasticity of supply question, that is good waffling, because if you want to change your supply, it takes time to do that. If you want, say, to increase your supply of strawberries, it's going to take time to actually grow those strawberries. If you want to increase the supply of oil, maybe you've got to find a new source of oil, sink a well, and do that same with mining. It takes time to increase your capacity. For example, over the last few years, Manchester City, Arsenal and West Ham have all moved to new stadia. However, how many years were they at their previous stadium? The Berlin ground for West Ham, they moved there in the 1920s, and it's taken them into the 2000s for them to actually increase their capacity by moving. Second factor that's going to make supply elastic is if there are stocks available of the product. So for example, if there's an increase in the price of oil, when you want to sell more oil, if you've got oil supplies available, if you've got oil in reserve, then you can do that. So the Americans, for example, have a strategic oil reserve, and if the price goes up, then they can release some of that easily. If you haven't got those stocks available, well, you can't, so you're going to be inelastic. If there are workers you can bring in to do those jobs, that again makes it elastic in supply. If there aren't, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to increase your supply. If there's spare capacity in the industry, if say you've got unused production lines, then again that makes it elastic because you can relatively easily bring those into use. You don't have to actually increase your capacity. If the production process is relatively straightforward, then elasticity of supply is going to be high. If, for example, someone turned up to your class and said, hey, if you sweep the streets, and I'm going to give you £1,000 a day, you probably wouldn't be at that class the next day. However, if someone came into your room and said, hey, we're going to give you £100,000 if you successfully do a heart transplant, well, you wouldn't be able to do that the next day because it takes years to train up as a heart surgeon. So one of them, relatively straightforward, sweeping the streets, and pretty much anyone can do it. The other one, the production process is relatively complex. And finally, last thing on this complete presentation, if there are low barriers to entering the industry, then that makes it elastic. With a lot of industries, it's quite difficult to join it. For example, you can't just set up your own train line. You need a permit from the government to do that. And that is it on elasticities. Quite a lot there.